Welcome back, everyone. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating document. We're looking at a complete production script that outlines not just the complex history of the Vietnam War, but the incredibly strict rules for putting it on screen for a premium documentary channel. So this explainer is really about how history is constructed and presented visually, balancing the raw, messy reality of the past with the immense responsibility of the storyteller. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the specific cinematic rules dictating this project, move through the roots of the conflict, the reality of the jungle battlefield, the massive shockwave of the Tet Offensive, the human cost, and finally, the lasting legacy of the war. All right, let's jump into Section 1, Storytelling Rules and Historical Safety. Right off the bat, this production script doesn't just ask for a historical summary. It demands an immersive 4K documentary style using plausible, historically grounded AI-generated visuals. And there's a strict mandate for historical responsibility here. The creators have a very clear list of do's and don'ts. They're told exactly what to focus on: human consequences, realistic environments, think volumetric fog, and period-correct uniforms. But crucially, there's an absolute ban on glorifying war or using fictional action movie aesthetics. No over-the-top explosions or graphic gore. It's all about serious, emotionally controlled storytelling. Which brings us to the script's opening narration, setting an incredibly authoritative and calm tone right out of the gate. Quote, "The Vietnam War became one of the most controversial and consequential conflicts of the 20th century. The guidelines completely insist on presenting this as a highly complex event with deep human consequences reaching far beyond Southeast Asia, rather than just treating it as a spectacle." Moving right along to Section 2, the roots of the conflict, before the war truly escalated. To really understand the origin of this conflict, the script pulls us back to a crucial year, 1954. You see, before massive American involvement, Vietnam had already endured decades of colonial rule. In 1954, French colonial forces were finally defeated, and the country was divided into a communist North and an anti-communist South. This specific division is the primary spark for the decades of tragedy that followed. But, why did it escalate so dramatically? Well, picture a vintage, low-light Cold War planning room. Paper maps on the table, desk lamps casting long shadows, analog telephones. American leaders at the time were completely gripped by geopolitical paranoia, terrified that the spread of communism in Southeast Asia would destabilize the entire region. So what started out as political and military support for South Vietnam rapidly shifted into a massive, large-scale American war effort fueled almost entirely by these global political fears. Okay, Section 3, the jungle battlefield, which was dense and completely unfamiliar to foreign troops. The production script actively moves away from excessive, chaotic gunfire, leaning heavily into atmospheric reality instead. We're talking tropical rain, thick, suffocating vegetation, flooded rice fields, and muddy boots. As the narration clearly states, the battlefield offered few easy answers. The instructions here emphasize the sheer uncertainty and exhaustion on the soldiers' faces, rather than hyped-up action sequences. It's all about capturing the intense psychological weight of fighting in dense jungle against hidden positions. And this stark dichotomy really defined the entire conflict. On one side, the American strategy relied on massive scale, rapid movement via helicopters, and gigantic supply chains. On the other side, guerrilla tactics, fighters moving through narrow, low-lit underground tunnel networks. It's a fascinating and tragic clash between a vastly powerful, highly mobile military and a smaller, determined force relying on extreme local knowledge, concealment, and the element of surprise. Now for Section 4, the Tet Offensive shockwave. We shift gears here into the year 1968, stepping out of the jungle and into historically grounded, smoke-filled urban streets. The Tet Offensive was an absolute turning point in this war. Now, communist forces actually suffered enormous military losses during these highly coordinated attacks across South Vietnamese cities. But the sheer, unprecedented scale of the offensive shocked the world. The script carefully avoids showing graphic gore to convey this, noting instead that the psychological and political impact of this event completely shattered the American public's perception of how the war was actually going. And the lens dramatically shifts to the United States because of that shockwave. Think late 1960s American city streets, period cars, newspapers stacked on the corners. This was the very first war where television truly brought the grim reality of the conflict directly into American living rooms every single night. Because of that access, the home front became deeply, deeply divisive. Widespread headlines and growing protests, especially by college students, started dominating the cultural landscape. Section 5. The human cost. In the wake of all that geopolitical chaos, the script demands that we slow the pace way down, using restrained, quiet imagery to honor a very harsh reality. Quote, behind every military operation were civilians caught in the middle. The focus shifts away from soldiers and onto displaced families, abandoned belongings, and destroyed villages. Enormous numbers of Vietnamese civilians, along with soldiers from all sides, lost their lives. The script remains completely impartial, reminding us that regardless of your politics, the human consequence is the true, undeniable core of this history. Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, Legacy and Aftermath. To wrap up this explainer, we have to look at the permanent scars left on the world stage. The script traces the end of the war in two major beats. First, the 1973 Paris Peace Accords and the gradual U.S. withdrawal, visualized by period-correct equipment being packed away as aircraft depart into a hazy sunset. Then it jumps to 1975, depicting the Fall of Saigon through crowded, smoke-filled evacuation points. This effectively ended the war and unified Vietnam under communist rule. These beats build a very clear historical timeline. Decades of complex tragedy anchored into 5 defining moments. The 1954 division, the 1965 escalation of U.S. combat involvement, the 1968 Tet Offensive shockwave, the 1973 withdrawal, and finally, the 1975 Fall of Saigon. The legacy of those dates is absolutely profound. Vietnam itself suffered enormous human and environmental damage that lasted generations. Meanwhile, for the United States, the war permanently transformed politics, culture, journalism, and basic public trust in institutions. It sparked a lasting, deeply entrenched debate over foreign policy, military intervention, and the real-world limits of global power. Which leaves us with this final thought. By looking at how strictly this production script controls its storytelling, banning action movie aesthetics and demanding a focus on quiet human consequences, we really have to ask ourselves, how does the way we choose to remember a conflict shape the conflicts of our future? If we deliberately strip away the Hollywood glamour and mandate historical safety, do we finally start to learn from the past? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.